Hello, hello, hello. This is the webinar, Why We're Going to Win on Climate, produced by Republican and featuring our own Executive Director and former Congressman Bob Inglis. My name is Angela, and I am Republican's Engagement Director, as well as their digital guru. Here at Republican, we are a growing group of conservatives who care about climate change and want to take action. So we encourage you to ask questions and share comments during today's meeting. However, we do ask that you please raise your Zoom hand so that we can call on you. And in case you are not a Zoom aficionado, down at the bottom of your screen is a button that says reactions. If you hit that button, you should get the option to raise your hand. Now, a quick tip, and I am personally very, very awful at doing this. After you're done talking, you need to hit that button again to lower your hand, or else we're going to think that you're just really, really excited to talk to us today. So welcome. We are glad that you are here. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Republican's Communications and Programming Director, Price Atkinson.
Well, hello. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. It's going to give me a chance to get a little nostalgic here for just a short little time before we get going and turn the stage over to our fearless leader, Bob Inglis. As Angela mentioned, I'm the communications and programming here at Republican, and I've got the longevity of serving with Bob here on the team, or serving with and for Bob the longest, having worked for him going back to Inglis 2.0. Some of you have heard Bob talk about the metamorphosis, but he served a pair of 6-year stints in the House from 1993 to 98, and then that was Inglis 1.0, and then the new and improved version was Inglis 2.0, and that was 2005 to 2010. And that's when I was very fortunate enough to come on board with the Inglis team. So I was there for the duration of 2.0, and I was there, going to use this as a launching point when Bob was getting ready to go to his first Codell to Antarctica, and that was at the end of 2005. Crossing over to the very beginning of 2006. And for those who don't know what a Codell is, that's just a code word for a taxpayer-funded trip, but this was a very important one, as Bob was going to make his first trip to Antarctica. I believe was going to hit New Zealand and Australia on that trip. And so I remember this trip very distinctively for two very important reasons. The first one was a very fun, important reason, and that's because Bob, on this trip to Antarctica, was getting ready to take a flat Stanley with him. I was in D.C. for Christmas that year. My wife is from Northern Virginia, and so I was at her mother and father's home, and it was after Christmas, but before New Year's, and it was just a couple days before Bob was getting ready to set sail, literally on the Codell to Antarctica. And I saw this flat Stanley, and I said to her mom, "Hey, what is this?" And she said, "Oh, this is Joseph's flat Stanley." Joseph being from West Peabody in Massachusetts. And she said, he's just sending it around to different family members to see if they'll take it different places and take pictures and get an experience. I said, well, I think I can send Joseph's flat Stanley possibly on a place that nobody at his elementary school will dare to go or take it. And so I asked Bob, sent Bob an email, I think it was through the Blackberries that still existed at the time, if he would be willing to take Joseph's flat Stanley with him to Antarctica. And he happily obliged, and several photos that you see percolating around the internet and several places in news publications. There's a picture of Bob at the North Pole holding up this thing, and that thing that he's holding up is Joseph's flat Stanley. So that picture lives on in infamy, as does that version of flat that Bob was so gracious to take. But the other thing that was more importantly, that was most important about that trip was you've heard Bob talk about the steps of his metamorphosis in coming around on climate change, and that was really one of the last ones where he got to meet Scott Herron, the Aussie climate scientist that was on the, I think it was on the back end of that trip, as they went to Antarctica, New Zealand, and Australia. But Bob obviously got to experience some incredible things. Obviously, seeing the ice core, the evidence in the ice core drillings there in Antarctica, and spending time and meeting Scott Herron and diving off the coast of Australia to see the coral bleaching. But Bob came home ready to act on climate. And when Bob sat in the ledge staff meeting, and many of our ledge staff meetings after that Codell, it was a singular topic. It was all about climate change. But that's when Bob came home really ready to act, and as our webinar is called, Win on Climate. So I will turn it over to our fearless leader with that, Executive Director Bob Inglis.
Price, I'd forgotten about Flat Stanley. Yes, he went with me to the South Pole even. And so there's a great picture of him at the South Pole. Speaking of pictures, too, I got to start this thing with an acknowledgement of the embellishment at the start of this thing. Did you notice? Maybe Angela can put it back up. The way that we advertise this thing, it is, you understand, an embellishment. That bicep, I've taken a ribbing from because of that. Various people have told me, hey Bob, I think it's not quite that large. But anyway, okay. So and that was Angela's doing. I just want you to know, it wasn't my doing. But anyhow, so wonderful to be with you today. And here's what I'm here to tell you. I know that. There it is. There's the embellishment. Okay, there it is. Off it goes. It's not that big. Anyhow, so here's the thing. I'm convinced that we're going to win on climate. And I hope that in the hour that we have here together, that you will also share this optimism. And I realize that some people might be saying, Inglis, I think that's hope so, not know so. Well, I do admit that's a little bit of hope so. But just look at the three forces that are coming together, and we're going to talk about those here today. But first, I got to tell you as a preamble to that, when you're in a challenge race for Congress, you can be deluded into thinking that it's your good looks and articulate ability that are going to get you elected in that challenge race, challenging an incumbent. The reality is it's a wave offshore that's going to get you to the beach. And the people that are successful in challenge races understand that. They know that their obligation is to point the board at the beach, choose a wave, and then paddle your heart out. But the wave is what's going to put you on the beach. It's not your style on the board or your good looks or articulate ability, whatever. It's not. It's the wave that's going to put you there. And so what I tell people about where we are in climate is it's a lot like a challenge race. We're depending on a wave. And I think there are three waves coming or going toward the beach, going to take us up to the beach. And they're basically the realities of climate change, the demographics, and then the policy wave. So first, that thing about realities, when I was getting tossed out of Congress in 2010, that was Price left out the fact there was an unceremonious end to Inglis 2.0. Actually, Price was there at that moment too, the very unceremonious end of that. When I was getting tossed out of Congress back then, it was a very much aggressive disbelief about climate. It's basically, I don't believe in climate change and you shouldn't either. And it was because the Great Recession was on, houses were underwater, not physically, we got that problem in some places, but financially they were underwater. The mortgage was greater than the value of the house. People were worried about their jobs. The banks were failing. It was really a pretty scary time. And so what happened is, if you've ever seen the film Merchants of Doubt, is Republican leadership basically switched on climate. Up until then, Republicans were all signed on acting on climate. Remember, there's an ad, early '08, Newt Gingrich on the couch with Nancy Pelosi. We don't agree on much, do we, Newt? No, Nancy, but we agree climate change is real. That was early '08. By the end of '08, Newt had switched. We don't know, he said. And so others also switched, Boehner, Mitt Romney for a while. He came back to himself, thankfully. But so in that switching, what they were doing, I think, is helping to take one worry bead off the strand. Climate change, don't need to worry about that. And people were glad to hear that, take one worry bead off. We're worried about the house. We're worried about our job. We're worried about the banks. Great. You took one off, one bead off, the climate bead. And so that was what it was like back in 2010. But since then, at republican.org, we've seen a big change. And I think our compatriots on the eco-right have also seen this. You still have some people arguing with thermometers, as our friend Catherine Hayhoe likes to say. But most people have stopped doing that. It's an argument you can't win. It reminds me one time, Alex Bosmosky, our co-founder here at republican.org, who's a little bit, I don't think he'd mind me saying, a little bit of a smart aleck, Alex was one time in Miami, and there was a young Republican gathering, and some gal told him that she didn't believe in sea level rise. And Alex shot back, "What? You don't believe in rulers, yardsticks? What are you talking about?" I probably would have handled it a little bit differently, but pretty great way for Alex to answer that question. You don't believe in yardsticks? And so people really have stopped arguing with the yardsticks, the rulers, and the thermometers. So the realities of climate change are the first wave that's going to get us, we think, to the beach. Second wave is the demographics. And our friends at CRESS, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, did a poll a while back, and they found that 81% of Republicans from age 18 to 44, so it's 81% of Republicans ages 18 to 44, say that climate change is either a severe threat now or maybe worse in the future. 81%. So it's so different than back in 2010, right? Because of the demographic trend coming. And here's the thing. There are a good number of long time horizon Republicans in the House and the Senate. And what I'm talking about, long time horizon people, they're people who plan on being reelected over and over. They want to win in 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. They want to keep on going. So they are long time horizon Republicans. They see this demographic trend. They know that young conservatives want action on climate change as much as young progressives do. Apparently, they plan on living on the planet for a while. And so they want action. And so there's long time horizon Republicans, and there are a fair number of them. I mean, look at John Curtis's Conservative Climate Caucus in the House, for example, over 80 members. It's a substantial caucus in the U.S. House. And so those are long time horizon Republicans. They want to lead that constituency. And then the state of our country and party, I guess, at this point, is that there's another very short time horizon Republican. He wants to win just one more election, just one. And so he's got a short time horizon. He really doesn't need to respond to that long time horizon constituency out there, because right now, we all dream of young people voting in large numbers, but the reality is, over and over, what we find, they're low propensity voters. Seniors, high propensity voters. And so if you're that guy eking out one more election, just one, then you really don't need to worry about that those young people, those 18 to 44-year-olds that 81% of them acknowledge the problem of climate change. So you double down on climate disputation. It excites your base, and you plan on eking out that one last victory. But here's the thing. Even if Donald Trump wins in 2024, he's likely to be pretty much a lame duck by 2026. Because a second term of a presidency is where the lame duckness starts. Because at that point, everybody's looking around. What's next? What's the new? What's the next? Who's coming next? And so at that point, a president's power or influence really starts to wane. That'll be true, oddly, in this situation we're in right now, regardless of who is elected, right? Or if it's Joe Biden reelected or Donald Trump reelected. In both cases, both of them are second termers. And so their influence will decline in 2026. And so by that point, what we see is these demographics beginning to push toward the beach. Another wave coming, which is, hey, we got to respond to these demographics. And by the way, at republican.org, we love it if Republicans that we're working with have a heartfelt devotion to the topic of climate change. But we'll take it either way. In other words, if it's just political convenience for them, we'll take that because it's a vote either way. It's sort of like Richard Nixon. Did Richard Nixon really care about clean air and clean water? Maybe. He vetoed the Clean Water Act and had to be overridden, but he signed the Clean Air Act. But one thing's for sure is Richard Nixon knew how to read polls. And he could see that people back in 68 and on to 72 when he got reelected were very concerned about pollution. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio was on fire. People were really aware of a problem. And so Richard Nixon responded. So like I say, we'd love it if it's heartfelt devotion, but we'll take it either way as those long-time horizon Republicans respond to the demographic trend. So I've talked about the realities of climate change. That's a wave that's going toward the beach. I've talked about the demographics. That's a wave that's going to the beach, that young people really want action on climate, young conservatives as much as young progressives do. Then the third wave is a policy wave. And this is pretty exciting because we think that what's going to happen is we're going to be taught about a carbon border adjustment mechanism by the Europeans. And that's a little bit tough for us as republican.org. You don't exactly want to tell fellow conservatives something that the Europeans are going to teach you. You know what I mean? It's one place it may be Australia. That'd be fine if we learned something in Australia. It'd be fine if we learned something from the UK. You really don't want to tell them too much about Europe because conservatives don't tend to cotton too much to what comes out of Europe. But here's the thing. Starting in October of last year, October 2023, companies that were exporting stuff to Europe had to start reporting their emissions, their CO2 emitted in the production of their stuff that they're sending into Europe. And so in 2026, using that data, those companies are going to be hit with a carbon tariff or fee or tax or carbon border adjustment mechanism. There are a lot of economists who refuse to call it a carbon border adjustment mechanism because they say it's technically not that. It's really more of a carbon tariff. Whatever it is, the fact is that if you're importing stuff into Europe and it's 2026, you're going to have to pay a fee, a tax. You're going to have to buy credits, European credits, to cover the emissions you had in making that product. And so we think that's when the light bulbs go on in the Capitol, because we can envision a phone call sort of like this. Nancy Mace, who's been in the news a fair amount lately, First District of South Carolina Congresswoman, one of our target states. We're our target states: Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Indiana, Utah, Idaho, and Eastern Washington. And so Nancy Mace down in the First District represents Nucor Steel. They make steel, and I assume that some of it probably makes its way to Europe. And so I can envision a call coming up to 2026 from Nucor Steel to Nancy Mace saying, "Yo, Nancy, do you realize that we're going to be paying a tax essentially to Europe on our products that we import to those countries that you could have collected here? And it makes no difference to us, Nucor Steel. It makes no difference to our customers because it's got to be paid one way or another. So which would you rather, Nancy? Collect it here in America and offset our terrible debt and awful deficit? Or do you want us to fork it over to the European countries? Which one?" Well, I think that the lights sort of start going on. And then the big light goes on, maybe at the top of the Capitol. The one that lets you know that either the House or the Senate is in session. It's at the very top of the cupola in Congress. By the way, it's what spouses used to say was plausible deniability. It's either the House or the Senate that's in session when that light's on. So if your spouse saw the light, they knew that you were supposedly in session. But anyway, so the big light on top of the Capitol goes on. And we realize, oh, we could do that to China. We could charge a fee on their importing to our most desirable marketplace in the world, a carbon fee. And we could make it in their interest then to do the same thing, but we could collect that fee if they're not going to. And so that's when the big lights go on and this policy wave takes us the rest of the way to the beach, we think. And so it's really those three things. It's the realities of climate change that we're all experiencing. Used to deny, not so many people deny it anymore. Then the second, the demographic wave, the political reality that you got to respond to these young people, young conservatives who want action on climate. And then the third one, this policy wave that is going to sweep, we think, from Europe. And there may be some skeptics out there about how Inglis, we love it that you want to be optimistic, but we're not so sure. Let me just remind you with a historical context. I was in Washington recently, and sometimes it is a little bit discouraging because you think, gee, this seems so hard for these folks. The politics here are difficult, particularly when you got long time horizon, you got the other guy, the short time horizon guy. And he's pretty scary to all these folks. And so, it can get sort of discouraging. But it occurred to me in my last visit to DC, which is just last week, that we're sort of in an analogous situation to where we were at the beginning of World War II. President Roosevelt was doing all kinds of really pretty constitutionally shady things in order to have America engage Hitler and help Winston Churchill. There were some things that were close to the line, or maybe even over the line, as he tried to lead America into this thing. We had America firsters saying, isolation is the way to go. Charles Lindbergh, a very high-profile proponent of America First, and Eleanor Roosevelt called him a Nazi. But anyway, so you had these people that were very isolationist, very much resisting this obvious need to engage with the fascist thing that was spreading. And so there was a leader in the UK, Winston Churchill, who famously said, or was quoted saying, I'm not sure he actually said it, but he said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option. And so we were in the process of exhausting every other option in World War II. Lend, lease, we'll give them some boats. We'll do some things. Meanwhile, we're doing some terrible things too, like sending boatloads of Jewish folks back to their death in concentration camps. I mean, really some things that we wish we hadn't done and wish we'd seen, right? But there was a leader who was leading. In that case, is Winston Churchill, and he caused America to begin to see it. But then, of course, Pearl Harbor was the catalyzing event. So now what we've got is sort of a group of leaders, perhaps the European countries, that are saying to America, America, just like in World War II, you are the indispensable nation, the one we've got to have on board. We need you. Can you please get with it? Come with us. We need you. And by the way, your company is going to have to pay this tax starting in 2026. So why don't you do that to China? Everybody wants access to your market. You can be the one that can really lead this fight on climate change. So I think we've seen the historical precedent for this, and I'm very hopeful that we're going to see a way forward for America to actually lead on climate because of these three waves. So having said all that, let me stop there and hear your questions and comments and suggestions. I'm very interested in your suggestions if you want to make any, or just comments as well as questions. So feel free. I think Angela's going to call on people with their hands up, and you can talk to us. She'll take you off mute so you can talk, or you can put it in the chat, and Price will feed those questions to Angela. So let's see what you're thinking about any of these things, the three waves, and anything else you want to offer here today.
So we have Dr. Joel Schroeder there, who has a question for you, Bob.
Hey, I was just thinking, China's now got the #1 electric car company in the world. They are going to build tons and tons of renewables. Inflation Reduction Act has been passed, and it looks like, I'm super optimistic. Technology's crushing, right? The price of lithium continues to drop. The price of batteries drops. Solar drops. They now make electric semis. It's just getting better and better and better. And so I'm super optimistic we're going to win. And I'm just worried all Republicans are going to do or show up after the party's over and say, oh, yeah, we're on board too. Yet we fought it every step of the way. And essentially aren't going to make any contribution. We're just going to pretend we were for it, even though at this point, I'm almost think it's inevitable, but not because of anything we've done, only because the technology people did it, and the Democrats did it. What do you think? I'm being too pessimistic on for us Republicans, or what do you think?
Well, Joel, first, I agree with your optimism about the technological changes, because they are dramatic. I was just The Economist this week has some really interesting stuff on additional technologies that you didn't mention just there, like these bricks in a box thing where you can store enormous amounts of industrial heat, essentially, in some pretty creative ways, and then release it when needed. Wow. And then the use of heat pumps in industrial facilities. That's coming on. If I were on the board of ExxonMobil, I'd be ringing the alarm bell every time we got together as a board about how you see this technology. I mean, it's coming. And of course, The Economist makes its constant point. If you had a carbon tax, it would come even faster. And so I agree with you that I agree with your optimism about the pace of technological change. Pretty exciting. The key is to get the economics right, and that would really mostly be helped by a price on carbon dioxide, because that price on carbon dioxide is technology neutral. It doesn't have the government putting its thumbs on the scales favoring one technology over another. It just says, listen, accountability for emissions across the board now compete. And as to your pessimism perhaps about Republicans joining, well, I don't know. I just referenced that historical example of Charles Lindbergh and the America Firsters back in 1941. You know, they disbanded on December 8th, 1941, surrendered the charter to that organization called America First. Because, of course, what happened on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor. And so people come around, and people came around quickly in the United States when Pearl Harbor happened. You know, before that, it had been, well, maybe we can keep it over there in Europe, and he'll be over there. We'll be over here safe from the oceans. And then there came the reality. No, no, you can get hit here too. And so I think when people come around, we've got to welcome them coming around. And of course, I'm sort of the commercial for that, right? Price sort of indicated there, Inglis 2.0, you know, that's the new and improved version. That was the second 6 years in Congress when I was acknowledging climate change and working on it. First 6 years, I said it was nonsense. I just, all I knew was Al Gore was for it and I was against it. Pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was. So we got to allow people to come around. And we certainly do want to signal that to all conservatives is, hey, it's okay. You can be wrong before and you can come around. What else you want to know? Questions or comments, suggestions?
Let's take Alex Amonette's question. Alex, do you want to unmute?
Yep. Hi. Thank you very much, Bob. I have two quick comments and a question.
Yeah.
First, I really appreciate you doing the joint presentation with the Badger Club with the Democrat in
Oh,
East
yeah.
Washington. I think that's a highly effective format, and I hope that you're able to do more. And second comment is, have you noticed that in Montana, we've been doing joint op-eds with, we did one with a volunteer from Republican, and we also have been doing them with American Conservation Coalition and Citizens Climate Lobby. And we're trying to hit up all the small towns in eastern Montana that will accept our joint op-eds to help get a lot of those older folks who read the daily paper in the small towns. That's a comment. And then the question is, have you talked to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce at all about the CBAMs? Thank you.
Yeah, the last one is easy. I have not talked to the U.S. Chamber about CBAMs, but a good suggestion. Let's do that. About Montana, I think I should call on Chelsea to tell you about that. Chelsea was orchestrating the, helping to orchestrate that with CCL about the that great letter writing and op-ed writing thing in Montana. Chelsea, anything to add on that? You want to tell them about?
Yeah, I would just say that that was highly successful because, as we all know, there are people who read their local papers, whether they're a weekly or a daily. I'm from a small town in Maine. Everybody knows everyone's business from these small papers. So when you see real local people writing in, whether it's an op-ed or an LTE, it gets read by real eyes, and people might think, wow, I agree with this, or I need to learn more about this, or the local policymakers see that as well. So I just think it's such a critical way to get your voice across. Anyone can write an email to an office. Offices these days, I mean, Bob hasn't been in office for a long time, but I'm sure they're inundated with emails and phone calls. But wow, you see your name in an LTE saying, hey, please support this, or hey, thanks for supporting that. And their eyes will see it. So the more that other areas can replicate what Alex helped lead with some of our volunteers and other organizations, volunteers in Montana, I would love to replicate that, and especially other small towns and smaller states without like high density urban populations.
Yeah, it's so important. So please reach out to Chelsea if you would. You know, Republican.org, if you get it's a small team we got here. And so if you just go to that and send the info email to the Republican.org, Chelsea will end up getting it. And if you want to work on that with people like Alex in Montana or elsewhere, really a powerful way to get the message out. So thank you for that, Alex. And then on the Badger Club that you mentioned, yeah, that was a Democrat. He's actually also a very good friend, you know, and as Brian joked on that, it's Brian Baird, former member of Congress from the Seattle area. a centrist Democrat who is indeed a friend. He joked on that gathering that, mostly in Congress, what we say is my good friend, and then what you really mean to say is the jerk on the other side of the aisle. But in his case, really, when we say my good friend, we actually mean it. He's really has been a wonderful friend and somebody who is typical of what we hope to do, which is, we message with all this red, and cite Milton Friedman and Art Laffer and all those people you see on our website. But remember, the ultimate objective is to bring America together and lead the world to solutions. It's just that we got to let conservatives hear it in their own language first. And so Brian is the kind of guy, Brian Baird is the kind of guy who understands our MO and is willing to be there for bringing in some centrist Democrats to help with that kind of approach. And so, it actually is a friend. So yeah, it's a Badger Club. You can, I think Chelsea will be putting that in the week in review coming up. So what else you got here? Questions or comments, suggestions?
Let's hear from David. David's
Thank you.
up in
Thank
Maine
you.
there.
Yes, up in Maine. CCL in Maine. Bob, thank you so much for your laser sharp optimism. It really does help. It does help. And by the way, update, including John Curtis, there are now 82 members of the Conservative Climate Caucus in the House. Okay, it's growing still, more than in the Freedom Caucus. But we look forward to seeing you and your optimism in a week in our CCL meeting on greenhouse gas removal. On that topic, I'm wondering if you could tell us whether you think that greenhouse gas removal has the potential of being a bipartisan issue. The first bill up is Maria Cantwell from Washington and Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, plus another Dem, another Republican, and independent from Maine on carbon removal, emissions, and storage technologies.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I think so, David. I think that it will be a bipartisan thing. And it's great that it already is. I mean, if you got Cantwell and Collins, that's pretty good too, because both are maybe aware of the argument that some people make that carbon capture and sequestration just prolongs the use of fossil fuels. But I can hear that argument, but I don't think it should be persuasive, seems to me, and it obviously has not been persuasive to either Senators Cantwell or Collins, because in the meantime, there are emissions that are sort of unavoidable at this moment. And so if you can capture in the process the CO2, then why not do it? And so will that remain a need? Well, not if fusion ever happens, not if some of these bricks in a box things happen, not if a new kind of concrete is created and made, cost effective. But do what you can while you can. And so I would say, great, let's try to capture it.
Yep. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Let's hear from Brady Ferguson.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Bob, for doing this event and for your optimism, especially. I have a question regarding the idea of a regenerative economy. And just to explain where I'm coming from, I work for an organization called the Climate Solutions Accelerator of the Genesee Finger Lakes region. We're based here in Western New York State. And over the past year, we have been exploring as an organization and with people in our community, this idea of a regenerative economy and how do we build this in our region. Now, our organizational values include being inclusive and being nonpartisan, but it has been challenging for us to include more people, more right of center people in our work and in this discussion. So I want to ask you if you have any advice for how do we include more folks from the right of center in this idea of a regenerative economy, not replacing capitalism with communism. That's not what it's about, but more transitioning from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy, and how do we figure out how to do this?
Well, Brady, I think you've got it figured out at the biggest step, which is your awareness of your need to reach right of center. It's why I'm so happy to be on the Citizens Climate Education Board, which because CCL understands that too, and it's actually not that widespread. The awareness that you really do need to reach right of center. There are way too many in the very large environmental groups who plan on doing this all left of center. And I think it's just a foolish strategy. I mean, just think about it. You're in a 30-year process of decarbonization, at least. What's the chance of holding a Democrat majority in the House and the Senate and holding the White House and a majority on the Supreme Court for 30 years? Answer, not real great chance. It's sort of like my parents were really good golfers, and I was a terrible golfer, and I'd end up in the woods, and my mom would come over to help me find my ball, and she'd say, "Bob, it's a chip shot out to the fairway, and then you're just one stroke down." And I said, "No, Mom, look, right between those two trees." Whack, I'd hit the tree, come right back, right where I was. And then she'd say, "Now you're two down." And so that's that approach of thinking that, well, we can run this all on the left. So the great thing about what you just said, Brady, is you said you wanted to reach to the right. And in that, what you're doing is you're doing the most powerful thing possible, which is showing the vulnerability of saying to cousin Charlie, the Fox viewer who maybe at this point is discounting climate, you're saying to cousin Charlie, "Charlie, we need you." And you're being vulnerable enough to say that to him. And I think that's the thing that's where it really starts, is if you can just do that, it might just melt Charlie's heart. And here's the thing, the heart decides, the head justifies. So you got to get through Charlie's heart in order to get into his head. But once you get into that head, it'll clear pretty quickly. And it'll be like, well, what do you want to do then, Charlie? You believe in free enterprise. You believe in accountability. Well, can't we have accountability for emissions and then all that regenerative technology you were just talking about? The economics change for it, so that if you bring accountability to the dirty stuff, then the stuff that can regenerate becomes way more viable. And so that then becomes Charlie's language. You're now talking his language. You're talking about free enterprise innovation. You're talking about accountability. And and of course, it's the language of many progressives too, and progressives understand that just as well. And so then you're getting the process of bringing people together. And so I acknowledge the challenge that you're having, which is how do you reach right of center? But it starts with where you are, which is acknowledging your desire to do that. And then the thing that we send out at Thanksgiving. Win Lee made this wonderful video about how to listen to people first, and the ears on the animation get bigger. And that's where you start, is trying to listen to them, express that vulnerability, listen to them, and then once you've heard them, start using their language. And that's, of course, and that's what we try to do at republican.org. And I'm excited about what you're doing, because I think that there's some really exciting technologies out there. We saw them all the time on Science Committee. Brian Baird, who I mentioned a minute ago, he and I were on Science Committee together, and so I'm sure he'd say the same thing. We saw all kinds of new technologies, all kinds of exciting stuff. Ways to make electricity, all kinds of ways, wave energy, micro systems in water lines, all kinds of things. But the challenges are not economic, because they're the big ones that get away with dumping into the trash dump of the sky without any accountability and without paying any tipping fee for the dumping there. Well, that means all the economics of those new technologies just don't pencil out. And so it's why this pricing mechanism is so important. Give me an amen. I'll stop preaching about that. We'll move on to the next question. What else you want to know? Questions, comments, suggestions?
Davis, you said early on in the chat you wanted to raise your hand. So let's hear from you now.
Yes, please. So on the note of accountability, let's talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. Accountability is not there for that, and arguably some foolish ways to spend the money have been decided on. That said, one of the presidential candidates said in one of the debates that misguided solutions to climate change kill more people than climate change. And he is probably right. So how to suggest policies and to fairly criticize policies that are misguided and are causing problems, and to distill those from policies that actually might help things out.
Yeah. So yeah, Davis, tell me which any nominations for that? The ones that you or what you've heard might be actually more harmful than good. What in the Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, for one thing, on the Inflation Reduction Act, I am a consulting engineer in the energy storage and renewable space. And one of the things we're seeing is lots and lots of programs are getting thrown out there, and some of them with less thought than others. Very high profile situation was with the Loan Programs Office using IRA funds. CATL, which is a Chinese state-owned enterprise, was able to build a 49% interest in the plant battery manufacturing facility in Indiana for Ford, and CATL gets to own all the IP from this from this venture. By the way, this is the largest battery company in the world, and it is a Chinese state-owned enterprise, at least part of the shares. I'll take things a step further and say we have the Justice 40 executive order ties our hands if we're going to spend any IRA funds, because you need a certain DEI checklist before you can spend 40% of the funds for this program. Yeah. And I will argue that I'm all for helping out the most worse off communities, but if we're going to impact climate, that is not necessarily, that should not be a criteria. It should be, where can you make the most electrons with the least amount of CO2? So I'll stop.
Yeah, well, you're certainly onto something that's definitely true, which is anytime you're doing those kind of credits, and that's mostly what it is, right? There's some direct appropriations, of course, in the Inflation Reduction Act, but there are also these tax credits. And so anytime you're doing those, you're favoring some technologies over others. As I said earlier, we're not so big on that at republican.org. We think that it's really better just to price in this negative externality. Whoops, I'm not supposed to use that terminology. My ad guy laughs every time I say that. Side effects, the side effects from burning fossil fuels. You build in the accountability. You don't have to have the government choosing EVs over internal combustion, because maybe people will choose themselves, and the market will respond. And so I track with you in saying that it's far more efficient simply to bring accountability for these side effects of burning fossil fuels, and fix the problem of economics that has an environmental consequence. And that's what we have here, is a problem of economics. And so, it's like the time that I was going to speak at the Wind Energy Association. And I told them, now listen, I'm going to get there and I'm going to say we're actually in favor of eliminating subsidies for wind and solar and all these things. And they said, yeah, but you're for bringing accountability for coal and natural gas and petroleum in their dumping into the trash dump of the sky, right? And I said, yes, of course. They said, well, come ahead then, because if you get rid of that biggest subsidy of them all, which is dumping into the trash dump of the sky for free, we don't need a production tax credit for wind. Well, you don't need an investment tax credit for solar. because once you bring that accountability, you can say goodbye to all those subsidies. It's subsidies that expire, subsidies that become a lobbyist full employment act as they're getting ready to expire. And all of that sort of rent seeking from government really is pretty unproductive. So you see, we're pretty doggone conservative. I mean, I was going right there toward libertarians, I think, right there. But I think they're right about that. Just put the cost in, let the free enterprise system sort it out. But something I'd ask anybody on this webinar to help me with, we use a term accountable free enterprise. I need a better term than that, because it's like this. It's sort of an oxymoron, don't you think? Accountable free enterprise. But that's what we want, right? Is you want free enterprise, in other words, a system that innovates in the private sector, but you want it accountable. So any suggestions, put them in the chat, okay? Or get in touch with us at the info thing or email us about that a better word than accountable free enterprise. What else you got, Angela? Questions or comments, suggestions for us here?
Yeah, and I'm going to do a quick time check. We have about 7 to 8 minutes before our hour is going to be up. So we're going to hear from Bob Pertel first, and then Larry Howe will get you in after Bob. And then if we have any time left, we'll squeeze in any last minute short answers. Thanks, guys.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. I'm very interested in climate change because I have grandkids who are 2 and 4 and another one on the way.
Oh, wonderful.
And I don't work on this for money, and I don't represent any one particular organization. But what I do understand is thermodynamics and power density. And everyone interested in climate change should have this book by Blackliff Smill called Power Density. And I don't know how to get the background.
Yeah, maybe try. There you go.
Power density.
Yeah.
And this shows the power density of various alternatives compared to fossil fuels. You see what the high one is. It's nuclear. And the other things are in the dirt. And wind and solar cannot survive without subsidies because they do not have high enough return on invention, return on energy investment. And let me tell you how I explain this to 8th graders. You have a tank. You can put any fuel you want in it. And let's say you put a hydrocarbon fuel in there. And so for every hydrocarbon reaction, you get 1 electron volt to 10 electron volts energy out by reacting with oxygen. Now you replace it with something else, nuclear. A nuclear reaction produces 20 million electron volts to 200 million electron volts. So on a given volume, if you had a nuclear fuel there compared to a fossil fuel, how much more power density would you have?
A lot more. And that's and so it's really an important point you're making. It's why we did a recent webinar with the film Nuclear Now.
Right. I just showed the link to that. So let me continue.
Yeah.
So that's why I work on nuclear power, and the nuclear power that I work on is thorium. You know about thorium?
Enough to be dangerous.
Well, thorium molten salt reactor was designed by Alvin Weinberg at Oak Ridge National Labs to develop a nuclear powered airplane that would not have to refuel. So you could use it to drop a bomb on Russia or before satellites or whatever. It's walk-away shutdown, liquid fuel.
Yeah.
The fuel the waste lasts 300 years, and the waste is 1 × 10⁻⁴ that of a uranium plutonium reactor.
Yeah.
So they developed an engine and President Kennedy killed the program off in 1961. ICBMs came along, but that technology was continued to develop. They built a reactor that ran for 20,000 hours, and the information was stored on a child's library for 30 years, published on the Berkeley Nuclear Engineering site where I went to grad school. And guess who read it?
Who?
Chinese Academy of Scientists.
Ah, yeah. Mhm.
So now they have a 2 megawatt reactor working in the Gobi Desert without water, below atmospheric pressure. So if there's a leak, radioactive material goes in, not out. To walk away, shut down. The waste is the size of 4 M&Ms, and the cost of thorium over your lifetime would be $100. So
Wow.
China is now taking the lead in nuclear. They're spending $550 billion on nuclear, and nuclear is being done by Copenhagen Atomics, Seaboard Technologies, and Thorcon, and in the U.S., Flibe Energy.
Yeah. So let me get quickly so we can get on to Larry, who might want to have the last comment here. Is yeah, definitely with you on the exciting things about nuclear. And here's the thing too that's pretty exciting is I think some left of center, maybe they're going to respond to Oliver Stone's movie Nuclear Now. If you go to our website and you can see it, you can watch that webinar and watch the film. And so the exciting thing is that there's some on the left that are beginning to get this new memo. They were subjected to an old memo in the 1970s, and they turned away from nuclear. But now they're really more coming back toward or coming around on this. Just as I said earlier, we got to make room for conservatives coming around. We also need to make room for progressives coming around on nuclear, and to understand that people like Bill Gates and Jim Hansen, who are much maligned on the right, are people left of center who are very much in agreement with you that we need to be pursuing these nuclear options. All of that's featured in that movie Nuclear Now. But Angela, you were trying to get to Larry. Gets the last word. Is that right? Larry, tell
Hi,
us.
Bob. Good to see you again, and thanks for all you've been doing. Question with regard to the left of center trying to solve it all by themselves. And I ask this because I want to help. What ways do we need to make sure the right of center people aren't trying to solve it all by themselves? The Conservative Climate Caucus is a good thing, but I never hear them talking about how they're working across the aisle to come together on a solution. So this is something I think about is how do we make sure that we don't go into separate silos and think we're all going to solve it all.
Yeah, that's a good and legitimate criticism of our effort and CCL's effort in the Conservative Caucus is, it could be that we're doing this all wrong, while we're trying to reach out with all this red and reach to the right and reach right of center. But I think I just know this: if you were doing a Hispanic outreach church, I'm pretty sure you'd speak Spanish from the pulpit. And so if you're going to try to bring conservatives on about climate, I think you need to speak to them in conservative. But the good news is there are progressives who let us do that. CCL is a great example of that. And another one is somebody like Sheldon Whitehouse. I mean, here I'm a Republican, but let me congratulate this Democrat named Sheldon Whitehouse. Sheldon's always very good. Senator Whitehouse is always very good to give room for conservatives to come around, and he's constantly reaching out. So that's a good model and a good reminder from you, Larry, to make sure that we speak well. The thing that we don't do at republicen.org is we don't take the cheap shots. Angela and all of her communications, Chelsea and all of hers, Price and his, what I say, what our contractors say is never, oh, those terrible left-wingers, they're just awful, aren't they? I mean, that's a way of ingratiating yourself in conservative circles. but it's destructive of the long-term mission and goal. And so we just don't do that. We just try to make the case using the language of conservatism and be generous to people like Senator Whitehouse and Brian Baird. And so it's a good reminder, Larry. Good note to end on, too. Angela, I suppose we're out of time. It's you're about to give me the hook, aren't you?
Yes, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came today. Thank you to Bob for being our own feature. It's not really the norm for us. And I just wanted to give a heads up to everybody. We do record these sessions. I will edit it, and then you guys will get an email link to the session if you want to reread it, rewatch it, share it with anybody else. That probably won't happen until tomorrow, seeing how it is almost evening here on the East Coast. But, I just want to give everybody a round of applause that came today. Great questions. Thank you for asking questions. And we're all really glad that you're here. Thank you.
See y'all. Thanks so much.